honor now to introduce the 2009 Nonfiction winner for A Crime So Monstrous, Face to Face with Modern-Day Slavery. Remember, he has been mentioned here from this podium already tonight. He is a senior fellow at the Schuster Institute for Investigative Journalism at Brandeis University, and he is here to present the winner of the 2009 Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Nonfiction. Here is Ben Skinner. I think I got the year wrong, Ben.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Nick. Thank you all very much for having me back. As a handful of you know, I prepared mellifluent words to introduce the 2010 winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Nonfiction. Unfortunately, technology failed me, as did my flash drive. So I grabbed what was the next best thing, which was this this notepad, which, as you'll see, I've populated with more mellifluous words. But it does say at the top, "Leave a trail of genius." Thanks to Marriott for that. I began to scribble down what I remembered of my mellifluous words, and then my pen failed. So this is clearly not in the cards. And I keep thinking about when Sharon asked me to come back. And by the way, thank you. I want to echo Marlon's thanks to Sharon, to Mark, and to all of you, to the sponsors of the prize for having this, for creating this, and for having me back. But when Sharon asked me to come back, and she said, "Oh, and by the way, you're going to be introducing Dave Eggers," I felt a little bit as if I were the head of the International Arabian Horse Association, and I'd been asked to head up the Federal Emergency Management Agency by the president. Not that anybody would ever be so silly as to do that, but Sharon was with me, so here I am, and I'm grateful. Before I get to this year's winner, I want very briefly to update you. When I stood up here this time last year, I said something at the end, and perhaps it was so rushed because I was going over my time as usual that you missed it. But I said that I was going to give the prize to a specific program of Free the Slaves. Free the Slaves is the American wing of Anti-Slavery International, which is the oldest human rights organization in the world. And they had just initiated what they call a Free a Village program. And $10,000 happens to be the amount that it took to free a village. And so I gave this prize over to them, and frankly, then sort of lost touch. Well, coming back here, I got back in touch, and I got an update. So I want to very briefly tell you what you've done. A village, a hamlet really, of some 50 people, 50 women and children and men, in Uttar Pradesh, India, called Bahari, is now free. This was a village that for over a generation, had been enslaved to one brick kiln owner. Everybody in this village, including the children, worked in this brick kiln. These were people that were beaten regularly. When they resisted, they were in some cases tortured, and one of their numbers was killed summarily. Justice evaded these people until Free the Slaves and their partners intervened. They pushed for local police to do their job. They went in, and on January 24th of this year, they raided this village and they freed everyone in it. And the story has not ended there. The story has not ended there. Before you applaud, because liberation is really just rescue is really just the first step towards liberation. These individuals were given a small grant. They were formed into a credit union, into self-help groups. the women decided that they could manufacture incense and they could sell that in local markets. The men became wage laborers, but earning money, keeping the products of their labor. In the summer, they managed to pool their resources and they bought a street lamp, a solar-powered street lamp, so that they can be safe at night. And this August, for the first time in that village's history, the children attended school. A woman, an old woman, unprompted, said, "When we got free, it was like a second birth." So, thank you. The small act of humanity that you gave last year has done a great deal to building peace. Thank you. Now, three people that know a great deal about small acts of humanity building peace are, first of all, our winner tonight, Dave Eggers, and his subjects, Abdul Rahman and Kathy Zeitoun. Eggers, who is an editor, a publisher, a writer of 7 books, really needs no introduction, but it's my job, so I'll do it. He's become, since his initial novel, which was an autobiography, a memoir, he's become a voice for the overlooked. But his works are no human misery tales. His protagonists demand their humanity and remind us of all of our responsibility to stand for them. In Zeitoun, in What is the What, his previous novel, his previous work of nonfiction, I should say, Eggers tells the odyssey of Valentino Achak Deng, and in so doing, educated the world about the plight, the crisis, the terrible human rights atrocities that were committed as part of the Second Sudanese Civil War. And as Dave and as Nick and as many of us know, coming up on January 9th, if we, as the international community, do not stand and bear witness to the will of the Southern Sudanese people as expressed in the referendum that will happen in that country on January 9th, we may be witness to a third Sudanese civil war. I pray, and all of us should do more than pray, we should act to make sure that that does not happen. In Zeitoun, the book we honor tonight, Eggers confronts 2 national shames. He confronts the willful negligence of an entire city and an entire people after what was genuinely one of the worst natural disasters in American history. And he also confronts the systematic and deliberate denial of rights to a group of Americans, in this case, Muslim Americans, that continues today. Each of those crimes, as I've seen firsthand in the lower Ninth Ward of New Orleans, and as I've learned from talking to Muslim Americans, including my best friend who was denied entry onto a plane, each of those crimes is manifest today. They continue today. But Eggers' book is no soapbox polemic, thank goodness. It is the restrained story of a God-fearing man, his city, his family, and his canoe. Having survived the storm, Abdurrahman Zeitoun set out in this canoe and to save his neighbors, to feed dogs, and to do what the Federal Emergency Management Agency, so capably managed by the former International Arabian Horse Association commissioner, could not seem to do, which was save lives, which was promote humanity. But what happened next is truly an indictment of all of us, because we have no one but ourselves to blame when our elected officials discard habeas corpus as a quaint relic of the 17th century instead of a writ enshrined in the First Amendment. And when the act of discarding that habeas corpus took place, it was most visible at the time in a hidden place, hidden to the rest of the world, not to the citizens, the unfortunate 1,200 citizens of New Orleans who were detained without trial at Camp Greyhound. Zeitoun was one of those. We don't know across the nation how many American citizens have been detained without trial in the War on Terror. The numbers begin in the dozens of the confirmed cases, but they very rapidly rise to the hundreds. Those that were held at Camp Greyhound, their plight is largely forgotten by the country. But it has not been forgotten by Eggers. And the plight of New Orleans has largely, sadly, been forgotten by the country, but that too has not been forgotten by Eggers. Eggers has pledged proceeds of the book to the Zeitoun Foundation, dedicated to rebuilding New Orleans, and thus far they have given out more than $200,000 in grants to that end. Eggers writes, "All it takes is one small act of courage to step from the darkness to the light. You all know this. You all have done this, and by your presence, you do it again here tonight. I know you will join me in congratulating somebody who does this for a living. This year's winner of the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for Nonfiction, Dave Eggers."
Oh, man. Thank you so much. I don't always write out what I'm going to say, but had to this time. I was afraid I was going to mess it all up. I have been having the greatest time here in Dayton all weekend, so thank every one of you who's made me feel so welcome. I'm from Illinois, not too far away from here, and it feels like home to me, but still everyone has been incredibly welcoming, and I've made a bunch of new best friends, Geraldine and Marlon and Ben and a bunch of other people, and so I just want to thank Sharon and Mark and everybody else involved in the award, and everyone here in Dayton for helping to nurture it and take so much pride in it. It's a really remarkable thing, because I think it's really taking a village, you might say, to maintain and celebrate this award and have it grow year after year. So I'm incredibly honored and humbled to be in the company of those who've won this in the past, and I was so amazed by the past winners that I made the mistake of looking at some past speeches, and I looked at, just to sort of get an idea of what had been said, and I sometimes do that just to sort of place myself or get an idea of what I should write, and I looked at Richard Bausch's speech from last year, and for somebody like me who doesn't do this easily and doesn't do it without incredible nervousness, that's a bad thing to do, is to look at Richard Bausch's speech from last year when he gets a standing ovation and sort of is incredibly eloquent and lays out the entire history and purpose of the written word in 10 minutes. So, so I sort of threw away the speech I'd been writing, and I sort of put something else together this afternoon that I felt like it won't attempt to do that much, that Richard did because he's done it, and I invite you to go see it online because it is astounding. But getting to know Richard has been, an amazing thing over this last few days, and that's an incredible gift to bring all these people together, so I thank you for that too, and to be able to learn at his knee, and also hear his very dirty and inappropriate jokes, which he will gladly tell you if you get close enough. So, we were talking yesterday at one of the panels about the writing as a life and sort of the challenges of it, and one of the things that we were talking about was how much time you spend alone, or I spend alone in my shed in the backyard trying to write and pretending to write, and full of self-doubt and guilt and self-loathing and all of these other very productive things. And I think that, all that time, like I worked 10 years as a temp and did every odd job there was to try to find a way to live as a writer, and so that's where the guilt comes from, is when you sit there and you're not working and you're not getting work done and you're not doing anything and you're not feeling useful when you've been given this gift that to be able to write and to have people listening. And I think that ultimately what we're always trying to do, and I feel like I need to do, is I got to feel useful on a daily and weekly and monthly and yearly basis. And so that's what intrigued me about Zeitoun's story in the first place, because his sense of purpose was so clear and so pure that I just wanted to learn from him and to hear him talk about it and to watch him continue that life. And this is a guy that stayed after, when the storm was bearing down, he stayed in his house, and when the water came up, or he had sent his family north, and when the water came up, he got in a canoe, and what he did was go around the neighborhood trying to look for people that might need his help. And on the first day, when he made the rounds, he heard a cry for help behind a door. He jumped into the water, went up to the door, banged it, couldn't open it, finally kicked it, ran his shoulder into it, finally it opened, and there he found a woman in her 80s floating near the ceiling, holding onto a bookshelf, crying for help. And she'd been there over 24 hours, and he was able to save that woman's life because he was in a canoe and because he was listening and because he had stayed. And so from that moment on, he was absolutely sure of why he was there. He was sure why he was in the city, why he had been stayed at home, why he had bought this crazy secondhand canoe that he'd bought years before and had no other reason for it. All of these things were ordained by God, that he had a reason to be there, and this was his purpose. And so this intrigued me, because this is what we're all striving for, and how often do we feel that we're absolutely sure of why we're here? We long for this, and every so often we might hit upon it for a moment or two, but and for many people, the times that and for most people, I would say, the times when you're most sure of your purpose in life and your usefulness as a person is when you're coming to the aid of someone else. You're driving along and you're thinking of nothing in particular, and you're at rest mentally and physically, and then somebody on the side of the road has a car, they need their tire changed, you pull over, you spring into action, and suddenly you feel like, yes, I'm here. I have a jack. I know how to do that. I can change your tire. And you walk around for days afterward, electrified. That was it, everything else is completely dull by comparison. And I've had this experience where, like, every other meal, everything is like, but that tire that you could change, that you felt like, okay, that's why I'm here. And so, for that brief period of time, it all makes sense. You make sense. Your arms and legs and skills or your experiences make sense. And on one level, it's just an excuse, this need for help. It's an excuse to connect to a fellow human being. We walk through and past each other, and our very being, or down to our bones, we want to be connected to that person we pass by. But we have no conduit. We have no excuse. But when they need our help, that's our path. That's our reason to know someone's name. So Zeitoun was so electrified by saving that woman's life that he stayed. He sat on his rooftop. He set up a tent on his rooftop, on the roof of a home under 8 feet of water, and he could not wait every night till morning, till the sun rose, that he could get back into that canoe and get back in and look for more people to help. And this is how he said it. He said, I felt like it was lucky if I could find someone that needed me. So that's what he did. He kept it uncomplicated. He treated everyone he encountered without suspicion, without a head full of disinformation, with only the presumption of goodwill. And so he distributed food, water, he rescued people, he directed people to safety. He even fed a number of pets who had been left behind. And a week after he began, in one of the homes that he owned, he was arrested, handcuffed, thrown in a cage, called Al-Qaeda and Taliban, transferred to a maximum security prison, all without contact with family, an attorney, or anyone. No one listened to him. He was no longer the prosperous business owner, the husband, the father of 5, the pillar of the community. He was a man in a cage. No one saw past this new identity. Guards passed him, soldiers, cops, doctors, prison guards, nurses. To every single one of them, he said, I'm a person. I have a family. I'm you. Take this number. This is my wife's number. Tell her where I am. But no one would do that simple act. No one would make a phone call for 3 weeks. And during that time, Kathy, his wife, was sitting at home waiting for him to call, not knowing what had happened to him. And after a few weeks, she had no choice but to believe that her husband, the love of her life, the father of her children, was dead. But after 3 weeks in the maximum security prison, finally one man listened. And it was fitting in a way that the man who finally looked at Zeitoun as a human being was a missionary handing out Christian literature. Here was a Muslim man in a rural prison who might have suffered God knows what fate in 2005, who might have been disappeared for far longer in the rabbit hole of the prison system. This man said, sure, I'll make that call. And that act of heroism freed Abdurrahman Zeitoun. And think of that, the fact that we're talking about an act of heroism that's a phone call. In 2005 in America, making a phone call was a heroic act. This was a moment in American history when we could have done better, where we responded to a humanitarian problem with a military solution, where we made assumptions about the people of New Orleans without listening, where we paid little attention to individual human rights, where we treated our own citizens very often as the enemy. The first year these awards were given out, the Lifetime Achievement Award went to Studs Terkel, the father of contemporary oral history. He was a hero of mine growing up in Chicago, and I had the chance to meet him a few years ago before he passed on. And he made a career out of listening, and I learned a lot from listening to him and watching him listen to others. And he said a great thing about listening and about America. He said, quote, I've always felt in all my books that there's a deep decency in the American people and a native intelligence, provided that they have the facts, provided that they have information. And that's so true. When I was taking on this book, I said to the Zeitouns, let's tell your story, and the story has to be told, but I'm afraid for you. Let's change your name, let's disguise your identity so that if anybody has problems with Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Islam, they won't be able to locate you, they won't be able to put their focus, their antipathy, they won't be able to direct it toward you. And I remember the Zeitouns were very against that idea, especially Abdurrahman. He said, you know, this is my story, this is my name. They had this very proud lineage. He built this business from scratch, Zeitoun Painting Contracting LLC. He did so much to sort of, and he has such pride in his name that he didn't want it taken away. And so finally, we agreed, okay, the book will have your name on it, it will be your story. And I still was so nervous, and we hired somebody to answer phones for them and all of this stuff, and we told them, don't Google yourself for a while, and all of these precautions. And then what happened when the book came out? Nothing. There were no threats, there were no crazy calls, there wasn't even an email to them that had any negativity at all. All there was this incredible outpouring of support, of love, of affection, and more than anything, of apology. I'm going to read one of these letters that represents so many others that came through the mail just a few days ago. Hello. Not sure who will receive this email, but I wanted to send a message to Mr. Zeitoun and his family. I'm a white, middle-class, 47-year-old, fourth-generation Texas female who wants to say I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that you and your family endured ill treatment simply for being individuals different in color and religion from me, but the same in humanity. And thank you. Thank you for being an honest, decent, industrious family and remaining so after horrific treatment. And I'm sorry for the persecution you endured. I do not fear Muslims. Perhaps I am like you and only fear evil which does not adhere to color, culture, religion, or gender, but is what all persons must stand against. Sincerely, Tammy L. Stewart. That was the deep decency that Studs Terkel was talking about, a deep decency that's in everyone when we have the facts, when we listen, when we presume the best in people, when we endeavor to understand. There was a recent statistic that said that 68% of Americans have never met a Muslim family themselves. And it's been gratifying to know that at least a few more people have gotten to meet a Muslim family through hearing their story, hearing the Zeitoun story. And they've gone through a lot, and they used to have a lawsuit against the city and the state and FEMA and Michael Brown and George Bush and Mayor Nagin and everybody in particular. It was 2 pages of names that they named on their lawsuit, and it was an act of anger to get back at what they had been through. But now, since they've gotten so much support, such an outpouring of affection, that the love that they feel has doused the flames of their anger. And this act of listening and of empathy has healed some of those wounds. War is only possible when the so-called enemy is dehumanized. When we deny or obscure their common humanity, it's easier to accept the atrocities of conflict. And so the best weapon we have against war is constant and unshakable empathy. It takes time, and it's damned hard sometimes to presume the best of everyone. I went to the University of Illinois, so it's hard for me to presume the best of those at Ohio State, for example. But still, we must assume that any family member and any family hiding in a bunker could be us, that any man in a cage could be you, your brother, your father, your husband. And here in Dayton, you've memorialized the act of listening. Here, a heroic peace was signed through the act of listening, and here every year you nurture and honor that peace through continued acts of empathy and understanding. So I want to thank you and dedicate this to the Zeitoun family who had faith in me over the many years it took to write the book, and who I consider my family now. I dedicate this to all those who listen, to all those who commit everyday acts of heroism that keep empathy alive and thus war at bay. Thanks a lot.